Welcome. I'm Andy Kohut, president of the Pew Research Center and director of the Pew Global Attitudes Project. I'm very pleased to be joined by the two co-chairs of the Pew Global Attitudes Project, former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright and former U.S. Senator John Danforth. Their insight and guidance help shape this research, and I look forward to hearing their perspective on the results of the poll, which I'm going to present to you. Before we review these results, I'd like to mention one other person who I believe is in the room, and that's Mary McIntosh, president of Princeton Survey Research, who organized the field work. As always, she does a terrific job and made what is a very complicated process look easy, and it's not easy. Mary, thank you. This is our 9th survey in this program that began in 2001. And over the years, we've completed more than 240,000 interviews in 57 countries. These are not simple 4 or 5 question polls. These are complicated and long surveys. The poll that we're talking about today is based upon 24,000 interviews in 24 countries. It was conducted over a 1-month period, that is about April 7th to May 8th. Most of the interviews were personal, face-to-face interviews in almost all countries except in the United States and Western Europe and Japan, where we did telephone surveys, which is the approach, the standard approach in the West. This poll basically updates trends on the image of the United States, its people, views of the president, and views of American policies, and looks at many other global issues as well. Our headline today is that President Obama remains highly popular in most parts of the world, even though his job approval rating has slipped considerably in the United States. And this continued popularity around the world benefits the image of the U.S. Opinions of the United States remain far more positive in 2010 than they were for much of the Bush years. For example, the U.S. rating in Western Europe is in particular, overwhelmingly positive. 73% in France, 63% in Germany. I'll show you some slides a little bit later to give you the comparisons as to what they were just 2 or 3 years ago. Opinions are also very positive in other major nations, and our ratings, the ratings of the United States, improved markedly in Russia, up 13 points since 2009, and in China, up 11 points, and also in Japan. So the image of the United States looks very strong in comparative terms. I'm sorry, we're moving this slide projector. Most Muslim publics continue to hold overwhelmingly negative views of the United States, and that is the bad news in the survey. In fact, over the past year, the Muslim publics that we sampled have grown more critical of President Obama, and animosity toward the United States more generally continues unabated in Turkey and Pakistan, for example, where only 17% hold a positive view of the United States. In Egypt, we registered in our polling a significant drop from 27% favorable to the United States last year to 17%, and this is the lowest percentage observed in our survey since 2006. Closer to home, a special follow-up poll found America's favorability rating tumbling in Mexico in response to the Arizona immigration laws. Before the signing of the bill, 62% of the Mexicans gave the United States a favorable view. That fell to 44% in the interviewing that was conducted after the announcement of this bill. Obama's ratings showed the same pattern. The percentage having little or no confidence in Mexico jumped from 38 to 52%, even though President Obama is a critic of this legislation. He was tarred with this brush, at least in Mexico. More generally, overall opinion of Barack Obama remains broadly positive in most non-Muslim countries. The national meeting having confidence in Obama to do the right thing was 71% outside of the Muslim world, and overall approval of his policies was 64% in the non-Muslim world. In particular, very huge percentages in Germany, 88%, France, 84%, and Spain and Britain said they back the president's policies. Only the Kenyans gave a better review to President Obama than the Western Europeans. Now, that isn't to say there hasn't been some tempering of Obama mania, let's call it that, from last year. We found many fewer in Asia expressing positive views in some countries, not many few, somewhat fewer, expressing positive views of Obama, and strong endorsement of Obama even in Western Europe slipped a bit, but it went from a great deal of confidence to some confidence. It didn't go to no confidence or little confidence. However, there were clear signs of disillusionment with Obama in the Muslim world. In Egypt, the percent expressing confidence in Obama fell from 41% last year to 31% currently. In Turkey, it went from 33% to 23%. And in Pakistan, we saw the fragile 13%, or the very small 13%, go even lower, 8%. Outside of the Muslim world, one of the most significant findings of this year's polling is that generally positive views of the United States coexist with real significant criticisms, continued criticisms of the U.S. approach to world affairs and some of our key policies. That wasn't the case in the Bush years. In the Bush years, discontent with our disapproval of our policies went hand in hand with anti-American and anti-Bush sentiment. Not so here. Well, what are the specific concerns about the American approach to the world? First, the United States continues to be seen as acting unilaterally, not taking into account the interests of other countries. Secondly, there's opposition in many countries, especially Muslim countries, to U.S. efforts to combat terrorism. But I should add that we now have strong support for U.S. anti-terrorism efforts in Western Europe. That was not the case in the Bush years. The war in Afghanistan gets an even more mixed review around the world. And the poll finds, when we ask approval of President Obama, he gets subpar ratings on Afghanistan, Iraq, and Iran. It's worth noting that his worst ratings are for dealing with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now, this poll was conducted prior to the flotilla incident. Don't know what these ratings would have been like post the flotilla incident. In contrast, Barack Obama gets his best marks for dealing with the global economic crisis. One of the anomalies of this survey is that people around the world have a better view of his handling of the economy. 58% is the median average response, approval of his economic policies. In the United States, it's only 46%. In terms of overall confidence, opinion of President Obama is 43 points higher than Bush, even though the opinions about specific U.S. policies are not all that different. As in the past, we covered attitudes toward economic issues. Just quickly, I'll say that the global publics that we interviewed are mostly glum about the way things are going. And despite signs of an economic recovery in many parts of the world, the people don't see it. The notable exceptions, however, is significant optimism in China, India, and Brazil. Disgruntled majorities most everywhere generally faulted their government for their economic troubles, although many also blame banks and themselves. Relatively few blame the United States for the recession in their countries. I think an important finding in the survey is for all the economic doom and gloom, there is no backlash against international trade, and there's no backlash against a free market approach. We get the same strong support for the notion that people are better off in a free market economy, even though sometimes the economies go up and other times they're not in good shape. In wake of the financial crisis in Europe, we did some polling and found strong support for the EU, strong continued support for the euro. We've updated the euro finding just recently, and we don't find, in Germany, for example, in Western Europe more broadly, a view that the euro should be replaced by the previous, going back to the previous currencies. But we do see growing negative views of economic integration. Increasing numbers of the French and the British, for example, believe that economic integration hasn't helped their economies. And there's a divide in Europe about providing financial assistance to troubled EU members. The Brits and the Germans are reluctant, much more reluctant than the French. Again, this polling was done before the Greek aid package was announced, but I suspect that these numbers hold up as well as the Euro number held up. On other issues, we found support for terrorism remaining well below the 2005-2006 levels. And in no country did we find the majority of Muslims endorsing suicide bombing or bin Laden or al-Qaeda. The numbers are much better on all of those measures than they were back then. But we still have a not-so-trivial set of percentage of people who think that suicide bombing that targets civilians in defense of Islam is justifiable. Majorities in nearly every country, including predominantly Muslim nations, opposed a nuclear-armed Iran. There's widespread support for economic sanctions and considerable support, not widespread, but considerable support for military force as a way of influencing Iran. And that includes the publics of Jordan, Egypt, and Lebanon who are concerned about a nuclear-armed Iran. But it doesn't include Brazil or Turkey, I might add. So what I'd like to do quickly is run through a few of the numbers and then get the perspectives of Secretary Albright and Senator Danforth. Inadvertently, I showed you earlier the list of countries, so we don't have to dwell on that. Here's the trend line in U.S. favorability toward Western Europe. You can see how it dipped down in 2003 following the war in Iraq or the invasion of Iraq, and it came back last year, and it remains extremely high. In Poland and Russia, we have the numbers going up rather dramatically in Russia, and this may have something to do with the START treaty, but the Polish numbers remain strong nonetheless. In the Muslim world, the trend is really quite different. In Nigeria and Indonesia, there's a positive reaction, and has been a positive reaction to the United States since President Obama took office. But in Jordan, Egypt, Turkey, and Pakistan, those numbers remain about as low as they've been, and as you can see, the Egyptian number went down rather dramatically. In China, the percentage went from 47% favorable last year to 58% favorable. That's a big number. And we have an increased number of 66% in Japan. So the numbers are strong in just about all of those countries. Sorry to rush through this way, but I want to get through this so you can get the perspectives of my colleagues. In Argentina, the United States image remains less than majority favorable. That's not too surprising. In Brazil, it's more favorable. The Mexican number is a combination of the pre- and the post-Arizona law number. I wouldn't pay too much attention to that. And in Kenya and Nigeria, we are very well regarded, but we've been very well regarded in Africa for quite some time. Here is the trend. On pre-Arizona law, the United States favorable rating was 62%. It falls to 44% subsequent to the Arizona law. What's the view of President Obama? 87% in France say they have confidence in him to do the right thing in world affairs. That's 4 points off last year. But it was only 13% for President Bush in 2008. So the European numbers are very, very strong. And its views about President Obama are positive in just about in most countries of the world outside of the Muslim publics, with a little bit of backsliding. But he had so much room to backslide. These are still great numbers. But in the Muslim world, there is backsliding, and while the percentage point difference isn't all that big, the proportionate difference in going from a 33% confidence rating to a 23% confidence rating is very significant. That's in Turkey, and in Egypt, 42 to 33, and we see this in a whole range of evaluations of Obama, not as good this year as last. Here's a summarization of this notion of favorable views of the United States compared to 2007. The median is up 20 points. Confidence in the president is up 43 points, yet the basic view, do we, as the United States, consider our interests hardly different than in the Bush years. Looking at Obama's ratings, his overall ratings are good. 16 countries, a majority or plurality, said they had approved of him, and 5 countries disapproved, and that's mostly Muslim countries. Climate change, good ratings, 14-5. World economic crisis, 14-5. But then, when we talk about world trouble spots, it's an even division on Iran, even division on Afghanistan, even division on Iraq, and a balance of the balance of publics being negative on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now, keep in mind, this poll was conducted before the flotilla incident, so those numbers may be even more negative today. And so that's a brief overview on a very complicated survey, and I'd like to now turn to Secretary Albright.
This, as always, is a very rich survey, and I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions. I think that I was just kind of looking at it from the perspective of an American, of what is positive and negative. I think that obviously President Obama's popularity is very important and a positive, and generally Americans' favorability ratings make a big difference, not just because we want to be liked, but because it makes a difference in the way that we're able to fulfill what the policies are and what is good for the American people in operating in a globalized world. I think within that, what I think is very interesting is that the numbers are up in Russia, where clearly, as a result, I believe, of the reset and a genuine effort to reach out to the Russians has had an important role. I just finished as the chairman of a group of experts on a new NATO strategic concept in delivering kind of the building blocks of that to the new Secretary General. So I was very happy to see the support for NATO generally. I think that there are some outliers on this. There are some questions within Germany and Spain, but on the whole, I think supportive of NATO, and I think that's a very positive. I think it's obviously very positive that there now is not so much a support in the Muslim world for Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda and suicide bombing. The fact that there are those who agree that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon, and basically that they're not blaming the United States for what I see as one of the big negatives in this, which is generally an unsettled economic mood internationally, and among the various countries, kind of a sense that they are not doing well economically, but they are not blaming the U.S. They're blaming their own governments, the banks, a variety of aspects, but that is something that is worth looking at. I think that what is most troubling in this whole report are the issues in the Muslim world. Now, the hard part is just saying Muslim world because, as Andy has explained, you know, everything's lumped together when you're doing this kind of a survey in terms of publics. And there are varieties within. I've always maintained that the Muslim world is not monolithic, but kind of a sense that we don't understand what is going on there, that our relationships are not working exactly right, is something that has to be worked on. And is being worked on from everything that I can tell, and an understanding of the problems created by this disconnect between us and vast numbers of people in the world. I think what is interesting also out there is the general sense of satisfaction among the Chinese and the fact that they are regarded highly as a result of their very large economic growth. So their star is clearly rising. I am very, again, looking at this as a former American policymaker, in a positive way in terms of America's favorability ratings being up, and that while, as Andy said, some of the Obama mania seems to have been tempered, that President Obama is viewed very positively, and it allows him to do the kinds of things that I think have been, at least in the area that I work on, very positive, the whole approach to the nuclear issues, whether it is making clear that it would be good ultimately if there were not nuclear weapons, but working to have a nuclear summit here, the renegotiation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the START Treaty, moving in terms of trying to deal with the nuclear issues.
Andy, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. This is, again, a very interesting report and a very able piece of work by Andy and by Pew. It's quite remarkable for anybody who has been in politics to see someone retain his personal popularity as President Obama has, and it's an amazing degree of popularity, especially in Western Europe, really off the chart. And this is good, and it's good for him, and it's good for the country. Except my own reading of this report is that the popularity of President Obama is more for the idea of Obama than the reality of Obama. He is a very attractive person. He came into office promising change. He's not George W. Bush, who was quite unpopular throughout the world. He came into office and immediately announced the closing of the prison at Guantanamo Bay. He set deadlines for departures in Iraq and Afghanistan. He said that he was going to do away with torture. He made a trip to Europe apologizing for the United States, and all of this was very popular, and that is what I would call the idea of Obama. But with regard to concrete policies, I don't see the translation of his personal popularity into support for specific policies. And the more concrete the policy, the more the support falls off. So the hard things of foreign policy really don't get the kind of support that his general popularity would indicate. The hard things, including the fact that while there's a deadline for Iraq, we're still there. And while there's a deadline for Afghanistan, we're still there. In fact, of the countries polled, only Kenya, that was the only country in which the public said that our troops should remain in Afghanistan. And then with regard to Israel-Palestine, of course, the popularity falls way off. So I would simply point out that there is a disjuncture between the idea of Obama and the reality, between the general enthusiasm for the man and the attractiveness of the man and the specific policies he represents, which raises the question, when it comes to the hard things, and the hard things do involve at times the use of force and the engagement of military, who is going to do them? And to me, one of the interesting parts of the survey is that in 2 of the 7 NATO countries, the 2 of the countries did not agree with the proposition that force is sometimes necessary to maintain world order. The 2 countries being Germany and Turkey. So the question in my mind is, well, if we are going to avoid unilateralism, and I think we should, I don't think it has support within the United States, and I don't think it has support anywhere else. People are concerned about it. What's the alternative to unilateralism in doing, again, the hard things? I don't think it's the United Nations. If 2 of the 7 countries polled for NATO do not believe that force is sometimes justified to maintain the world order. It doesn't look like it's NATO. Is it possible? I just simply raised this as an issue. Is it possible to create a kind of NATO-like standing coalition of the willing, of countries that do share the same values and the same concerns, and that are willing on a standing basis to try to come together and reach common approaches to very, very difficult issues? What I found most promising in this survey has to do with the Muslim world, and the fact that in the Muslim world there is so little support for attacks on civilians, suicide bombers, terror. There is so little support for Osama bin Laden, and there is substantial support for sanctions against Iran. I found that very interesting. And yet, while there is apparent opposition to terror and extremism, there is at the same time a resistance to the U.S.-led anti-terror efforts. So countries say that Muslim countries, they do not want to follow U.S. lead. Does this open up some interesting possibilities with respect to policy? I'm not sure what those possibilities are, but it seems to me that where the Muslim world disagrees with the concept of terror, but at the same time doesn't want the U.S. to lead the charge against terror, perhaps there is an opening for public diplomacy in an attempt to marshal the opinions in those countries, so long as the United States does not appear to be the leader.
To take your questions now, and in giving your when you ask for a question, please tell us who you are and tell us to whom you're directing the question. Right here. Oh, sure.
Hi, I'm Anthony Starr with CNS News. Can you give us more details on the special follow-up poll when you asked about the Arizona law as far as polling in Mexico? I was curious of how you posed that question and just how the methodology of getting that polling for the Arizona law.
Sure. What we did was a follow-up interview. We did a small national sample of 400 interviews compared to the 800 interviews that we had done prior to the announcement of the law. And the questions posed were the same questions that we had asked prior to the interview, in the previous interview. How do you feel about the United States? There were some follow-up questions about this law, but they're not considered in this report. The only thing we're looking at is what is the pre-post reaction to the United States and President Obama in the days and weeks immediately following this Arizona law.
So the question wasn't specifically asked about the Arizona law, you just did the widespread poll to see if it changed?
That's right. Did it move the needle? And it moved the needle.
So you did not at all ask about the Arizona law?
We did ask some questions about the Arizona law, but they're not in this report. We're going to release them subsequently. What do we have on Richard? Where are you?
We have some questions about how people heard about the law and then asked people to rate certain leaders on how they're dealing with the law. And some of that you can see in this report, and we may have some other related things later, but there's a little bit of that in this report as well.
I guess the question I wanted to get answered is how that law was asked about. In other words,
but the most important thing here is not how that question was asked about the Arizona law. It's that when we did a survey that was completely comparable on the image of the United States without any reference to the Arizona law, we got a big difference, and a big negative difference. And the inference you draw from that is that there's backlash in the United States as a consequence of this law. Further in the back, right here. Whoops. We'll come to you later, but Lily, stay there. You've got the mic.
Okay. My name is Yela De Franceschi. I work for Voice of
Would
America.
you raise your mic because we can't hear you?
My name is Yela De Franceschi. I'm from Voice of America.
Mm-hmm.
And my question is to actually follow up to Danforth's remarks about the slippage of Obama's image in the group of Muslim nations and the problems that are sort of underlying that. Could you, in the answers from the group that you interviewed in those nations, get some kind of, let's say, background? Why are they so unhappy with the policies, or why are they unhappy with Obama? What specifically is triggering this slippage?
This is the Muslim.
The Muslim group of nations that
Andy.
Yeah, I mean, we have studied this issue for a very long time, and the antipathy toward the United States stems from a number of factors. The most important factor is that Muslim publics, especially in the Middle East, think that we're unfair. The United States is unfair in the way it deals with the Israeli-Palestinian issue. The second major factor is the U.S. anti-terrorism efforts are seen by many Muslims as anti-Muslim, not as legitimate anti-terrorism efforts. And this extends from the Bush years now into the Obama years. Reasons for the decline for Obama this year may have something to do with a little bit of disappointment raised by the expectations raised by the Cairo speech. We did see, for example, in Palestine last year, not a sea change in attitudes after Cairo, but some sense that the Americans were going to consider our point of view to a greater extent. And these are long-standing concerns. A majority of people in most of these Muslim countries think the United States represents a military threat to their countries, even the Turks, who are obviously NATO members.
Can I tag on to that? I think it is fair to say that some of the issues that President Obama is still dealing with are leftovers from the Bush administration, and the fact that we are in 2 wars in Muslim countries. That has something to do with it. The other that I think is interesting, the fall in support in Muslim countries for suicide bombing and support for al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, is that more Muslims are being killed in terrorist activities than previously. They are also victims. It is not just on non-Muslims. So I think that part is very interesting. And if I can just say, President Obama, the administration, is fully cognizant of the fact that there is a need to follow up the Cairo speech in a more robust way. So there was a big entrepreneurship summit. I personally have been asked to head a thing called Partnership for New Beginnings, which is a way to try to develop a variety of relationships with Muslim communities in a variety of countries on scientific exchanges, educational exchanges, public-private partnerships. So I think there's an awareness of that.
Thank you. We were going to ask this man a question. Have this man ask a question.
Hi, my name is Feng Wang from China's Xinhua News Agency. I have a question for Madame Albright. That's regard to China's perception about China. And actually, we've seen there are more positive perception about China on whether China is an enemy or a partner. We've seen actually a 10 percentage point increase both in the United States and in Japan. And my question is, do you think this is because of the cooperation the Western world has with China on the economic crisis, or is it because of things that was happening on the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and the Iran issue? Thank you.
I think generally what I find interesting, and it's not only in the survey but anecdotally, is that there is admiration for China's growth rate. And the fact that while there are economic discontents in other parts of the world, China's growth rate is steadily going upwards. the fact that the Chinese have brought so many people out of poverty, and the fact also among some, I think, that there seems to be a willingness of the Chinese to be a part of solutions on global issues. A sense, frankly, that a lot of more people know about China, have been to China, whether it's having gone and followed the Olympics or now going to the Shanghai Expo, just kind of a greater understanding of China and China's visibility on the global scene.
Questions on this side of the room? Yes, sir.
My name is David Alandete. I'm with El País from Spain. I wanted to ask Secretary Albright or Senator Danforth, going back to the Arizona law very briefly, since the support for the United States has plummeted so deeply in response to this law, do you think this is a start of a trend of anti-Americanism in Mexico? Because you see the data in Europe, in Spain, in France, and it's very positive. Not so in a neighbor, and you can consider this a leftover from the Bush administration or not. What can the administration do here, since the support for the law in the United States is so high, but it's so harming in a neighboring and very important country?
Well, again, I don't speak for the Obama administration, but it was very interesting when President Calderon was here and addressed the joint session of Congress. He talked about the various areas in which there was really potential of great cooperation between Mexico and the United States. There definitely was concern about Arizona. There was also concern about the fact that the ban on assault weapons had been lifted by the previous administration. And so I think that there are a number of signs of positive action between Mexico and the United States, and I think that there is a genuine effort to try to make sure that we're working together on drugs, for instance. I think that was the other point. And but I think there is no question that the immigration policies generally are the kind that are very difficult to deal with, and that one that the administration and the Congress, as far as I can read, is going to turn to. The oil spill, I think, has kind of taken up a lot of attention.
Thank you. Yes, right here.
Hi, my name is Patricia Mello with Estado, Brazilian newspaper. I have two related questions for Mr. Kohut. The first one is, the research says that 65% of Brazilians favor sanctions against Iran. Brazilian government is campaigning against sanctions. How do you explain this gap? And the other one is there's a 56% favorability to President Obama. Is this a good number, or is it decreasing because of the recent disagreements between the two countries?
Well, I think that it's very often the case that the publics of a country will not agree with its leader on issues, and this is clearly a case of that. The 66% is a good number for Obama in Brazil. It's a very big number, and I just think that the Brazilian public has quite a positive reaction, at least at the time of this survey, toward the United States. And well, what we did was we changed our methodology in Brazil, so the surveys that we did this year are not quite comparable to previous surveys, strictly speaking, but I think that the numbers, if you were to look at them, even taking that into account, they showed pretty strong favorable ratings for the U.S. So, no, they have not decreased. Right here.
I want to ask the panel what's the impression, because also if you have noticed a difference, because in this process also it's very important the Secretary of State. How are you evaluating the difference between Condoleezza Rice and Hillary Clinton in all this process?
Who are you, and who are you?
Perfil from Argentina.
And to whom are you directing this question?
For the panel, it's for discussion. It's also how is the role of the Secretary of State also in this kind of analysis? the change, the difference between the Secretary of State that was before and the one that we have now?
Well, I think that I'll just maybe
Go
you
ahead, you start.
My reaction is that Hillary Clinton is a very highly visible Secretary of State, more so than her predecessor. But nonetheless, the bigger issue is not so much Secretaries of State, but presidents and general conceptions of foreign policy. That would be my answer.
I would agree with that. I would only state the reaction of my granddaughter, who turned 7, who said, "So what's the big deal about Grandma Maddie having been Secretary of State? Only girls are Secretary of State."
The next question.
I think that President Bush was very unpopular. Why was he unpopular? Well, I think that he was facing a problem that we'd never faced in our country before. An attack on our soil, planes being flown into buildings, and we didn't expect it. It was a new thing, how to deal with this. The president attempted to put together a coalition of the willing with respect to Iraq, did so. The weapons for mass destruction weren't found. Other countries that were part of the coalition began to bail out of the coalition when things went bad for them. The Spanish had a bombing of their railroad, and there were some people from the Philippines who were kidnapped, and they bailed out. And so the United States found itself dealing with a problem that an increasing number of countries didn't want to deal with, and we were doing it on first impression. And the style of President Bush is the style of being very direct. And then along comes President Obama, and he runs for office promising change, without really defining what he meant by change, but it sounds good when the President of the United States is unpopular at home and abroad. Change sounds good. So then he takes office and immediately begins taking, I'd say, a lighter touch toward confrontation than President Bush did. He says that we're going to get out of Iraq by a date certain, we're going to get out of Afghanistan by a date certain, we're going to close down Guantanamo, we're not going to torture people, and so on. That sounds good to a world that also is seeing something out there that is very threatening. And the natural, I think, reaction of people is, good, let's try to sort of soften the situation. And I think that that's what's happened. I think that Obama isn't Bush. Obama isn't dealing with the question of first impression. And Obama has come in with really an effort to try to be popular. But the problems are still there. And Afghanistan is still chaotic. And Iraq is still chaotic. And we're still there. And it turns out to be harder to close Guantanamo than the president had hoped. So the problems are there, and we're dealing with the problems. And I think that that's why, wow, the reaction is, we like Obama. You know, he's our person, and he's a very attractive human being, a very attractive political leader. But at the same time, where's the answer? So I don't think it's the personality of the Secretary of State. I think it's largely the personality of the president compared to the realities of the world.
I would like to just add a comment to that. Based on the 240,000 interviews we've done over the years, we've learned a lot about the image of the United States. And what Obama has done, at least temporarily, he's caged the 800-pound gorilla with respect to how the United States is viewed. The great underlying concern about the world is American power. And that concern reached a peak in the Bush years because of the forcefulness that Senator Danforth was describing. And what we see now, I think, is going back to a point of view where that concern about American power isn't gone, but it's less salient. But it came quickly to the surface, even before the world really had a great sense of President Bush. We did a survey after during the first invasion of Afghanistan, and we were asking people what they thought about the September 11th attacks, and this was in October and November of 2001. And what we found was great sympathy to the United States. But what we also found, people say, opinion leaders saying all around the world, it's good that the Americans know what it's like to be attacked. I was shocked by that set of numbers. And over the course of the Bush years, discontent with Bush policies and forcefulness brought out, uncaged, let's say, this concern about American power. Right now, for the time being at least, those concerns about American power, which are really very difficult to deal with, are at rest or at bay.
And I also think that there is a genuine attempt to work multilaterally. That, and looking at the institutional structure, Secretary Clinton has reached out. The support for NATO is there, trying to work through the United Nations, the invigoration of the G20 process, a variety of ways that I agree with Senator Danforth, Secretaries of State operate within the context of their presidents. But Secretary Clinton is somebody who has a very large persona of her own, and so when she is somewhere in terms of the issues that she's dealing with, they get a great deal of attention and show this kind of change and the reaching out in order to get partners. I think both their middle names is partnership and a desire to get away from the unilateral, but of course it does take some time to get over what some of the previous policies were.
Let's see, right back there.
Thank you. My name is Alexander Gasyuk. I'm with Russian daily Rossiyskaya Gazeta. My question is to Madam Albright. As we just heard, the image of the United States and Russia has been improving rapidly for the last 18 months due to the number of reasons. But at the same time, as you probably know, the image of NATO is very low among Russians. So do you see any contradictions in that, and do you expect alliance image to improve among Russians as the new strategic concept will be unveiled? Thank you.
I missed the one part.
Could you just
what is the low part?
Sorry?
You said the image was low, and I didn't hear.
The NATO image among Russians is very low.
Right.
So do you expect the image to improve after the new strategic concept will be unveiled? Thank you.
What is interesting is, now I'll speak from the perspective of this group of experts. We went and we spoke with the Russians, and at the time the Russian military doctrine had just come out where the expansion of NATO was seen as the number one threat. So that was a concern. I think that in our report we made very clear that while various countries within NATO might have a different historical or geographical residue in terms of the way that they looked at Russia, everybody wanted to engage with Russia. And what we did was to write about the need of operating through the NATO-Russia Council and suggesting, in fact, that there be cooperation between the Russians and NATO on missile defense. So I think that there was a genuine effort to show to each other within NATO, but also to the Russians, that NATO was not against Russia, and that there were a variety of avenues for cooperation between Russia and NATO, and ultimately an open door. So I'm hoping that as the explanation of what is really, and again, I have to repeat, we didn't write the strategic concept. We provided the building blocks and recommendations for the Secretary General to write the strategic concept, which he will then take to the heads of state in Lisbon in November. So the discussion, I think, needs to go on. But I can tell you from the motivation of the group of experts, it was to have a real outreach and engagement with Russia, hoping that it would become clearer and clearer that NATO is not against Russia.
One last question right here.
Hi, I'm Alana Predatori with the DPA, and I noticed in your comments, Secretary Albright, that you mentioned from the research that the most troubling aspect for you was the Muslim world, the results from the Muslim world. But Senator Danforth, I noticed you said that was the most promising. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you both have differing viewpoints on the results. Could you both explain that?
I think we're both right. I think that the promising aspects are exactly the ones that Senator Danforth mentioned in terms of not support for al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden and against suicide bombing. What I find troubling is that the impression of the United States in the Muslim world is not positive, that the numbers are, 13% in Pakistan?
No, 8.
8. I mean, just a very, very low favorability, practically non-existent favorability ratings, and that is what's troubling. So that what is positive, and the way that I explain that is that more Muslims have been attacked now in terrorist incidents, but that generally the kind of trend lines, for the reasons that Andy mentioned, are not good.
I really think it's heartening. I think that the information with regard to the Muslim world and these points about not supporting suicide bombing and not supporting Osama bin Laden and being concerned about Iran, I think that all of this is positive. It is also the case that the view of the United States, including the President, is very, very negative. So is it possible to build on the positive in some way? Is it possible to try to encourage that positive aspect? And I think that's worth thinking about. But I don't think it's going to happen if it's the U.S. sort of saying, okay, here's our thing, and everybody else fall in line. So I think that I think that it is very useful to give serious thought to trying to build on and maximize this sentiment in the Muslim world.
Thank you all very much.